Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to another episode of The Politician and His or Her Idol. I hope you're enjoying your Saturday so far. But before I introduce you to our guest today, I would like to just highlight the purpose of the talk show, brought to you by BoXia and Via Media. So we want to bring Canadian politicians closer to the population, closer to you, allowing you to discover a different facet of them. A facet that is not accessible to us on a daily basis. They're humans just like us, so they definitely have an idol or a source of inspiration that influenced who they have become today. So it can be an activist, an artist, a political figure, and many other possibilities. And so today we are delighted to have the Honourable Omar Alghabra with us today. So Omar, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Irene. How are you? Thank you so much for having me with you on the show.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us. I'm just curious, Omar, how do we pronounce your last name correctly? Is it Alghabra?
That perfectly. By the way, a few years ago, I assembled a bunch of kids and I asked them to pronounce my last name, and I filmed it. And as you can imagine, each kid pronounced it differently. So the point is just to make light of the fact that many people may want to pronounce my name differently, but then I come out on the end and I pronounce it. So it's Alghabra, yes.
Alghabra, perfect.
Right.
Awesome. I'll keep that in mind throughout the interview. So I'm so eager to ask Omar some questions about his life. I mean, he lived in Saudi Arabia, in Syria before coming to Canada, but wait a little bit, right? Because we need to officially introduce him first. So Omar is a Liberal Member of Parliament representing the Mississauga Centre riding since 2015. And he's currently the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and to the Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So Omar, is that correct, or am I missing something?
No, you're correct. You're correct.
Awesome, perfect. So now the stage is all yours. Please tell us a little bit more about your experience overseas before we speak about your idol or idols.
Okay, I'm gonna try to shrink my my life in a minute or so, but I mean, my life is very similar to many new Canadians. I'm of Syrian parents. My dad, at the time when I was born, was working in Saudi Arabia, so I was born in Saudi. I went to school in Saudi, but I lived between both countries, between Syria and Saudi, growing up. And then I went to Syria initially for a couple of years. I moved to Syria for a couple of years, and then I moved to Canada on my own when I was 19 years old to go to school. So I came to Canada as an international student, and then I studied mechanical engineering at Ryerson University. I graduated. I became a permanent resident. I did my MBA after that, and I entered politics. Actually, my first run for office was in 2006, when it was the first time I ever got elected.
Awesome, Omar. Actually, I don't know if you know this, but I also was a former international student, except that I came to Canada a little bit younger at about 15, 16 by myself as well.
There you go. So, I mean, we can share probably many stories of our experience when we first arrived to Canada. And I think there are so many other stories, untold stories around the country of success, of making a positive difference. And I don't know how many countries can say they've welcomed an international student, and 30 years later, that student ended up being the parliamentary secretary to the prime minister or to the leader of that country. There aren't many countries around the world that can have examples like the ones that Canada have. And I'm just one example. There are numerous, limitless numbers of people who came here with no families, no means, and ended up being hugely successful. The measure of success is not just how well you do in politics, it's how well you do in business, how well you do in society. And there are so many impressive and inspiring stories.
Definitely very remarkable. I can completely relate to you. I mean, I've really lived and interacted with people from so many different countries, probably over 75, as I went to an international school as well prior to university. So definitely, it is very important and very remarkable what Canada allows us essentially to achieve, and the opportunities that brings to all of us.
Indeed, and I'm not here saying that Canada is perfect. There are many newcomers who face, in fact, all newcomers face challenges, and sometimes there are unfairness in these challenges. But overall, it's not just the system, but also it's the population, it's the public who are welcoming, embrace newcomers, give them. Treat them with dignity, with respect, and there are opportunities. So, there are people who say Canada is a land of opportunity. I would say Canada is a land of opportunity makers. So it's really remarkable what we as Canadians have been able to do over the last generations or two. And again, I'm not trying to say that we've done it always correctly or perfectly, but it's actually our drive for perfection and our humility and our recognition of our own imperfections is what makes us better than others.
Exactly. We just gotta chase those opportunities as well. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So as you can see, I'm actually on the couch of my home. So please feel free to make yourself very comfortable, as it is going to be a very relaxed conversation. So I think you have some tea, I believe, or coffee with you.
Yes.
Make sure to take a sip here and there.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I wish I could offer you some, but too bad the internet will not be able to transmit. I look forward to that day, by the way. Who knows? Maybe we can transmit food and beverage through the internet.
You never know what technology is capable of. So, so you have a message, Omar, for your constituents, your families and friends, or audience watching us right now in Ontario, across Canada, and internationally?
Look, obviously the audience has probably heard this being said before many times, but we are living through an unprecedented time. And we're going through a pandemic that no one alive has ever witnessed before. I read about the Spanish flu pandemic in the history books, but never ever imagined that one day I will live through another pandemic myself. And we have witnessed major changes to how we run our economy, how we conduct ourselves in our society. We've isolated ourselves. We closed down our businesses. So we've lost jobs. Millions of Canadians lost their jobs. So it's obviously a very, very unique and different times and difficult times. But the one thing I want to say is that now we're not over the pandemic, obviously, but now that we've gone over the last few months, the one thing I know, there's a lot of unpredictability, but the one predictable thing that one can take to the bank is that Canadians are very much committed to the well-being of each other. We're committed to each other. We know that our own well-being depends on the well-being of our neighbors and our family members, and that if we want our own self-interest, we have to look after our neighbors' self-interest because it benefits us. And that sense of community, that sense of camaraderie is what makes us strong. It's what helped us deal with the pandemic in a way better than other areas, and it's what keeps us cohesive. It's challenging times, and people are going through difficult times. Yet you see the solidarity in Canada and among Canadians that is heartwarming.
Definitely cohesive, united. We are going to get through this. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Omar, I was just wondering, when you received the talk show invitation, what was your first impression?
So the first impression was, oh, this sounds really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I also seen one of the shows of the BIA media where there was, I think, about, I don't know, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, about systemic racism, where people, community leaders, and experts from around the country were invited to offer their thoughts on systemic racism and what governments need to do. And I watched the whole thing. I think it was over an hour and a half or so. And I had found it really fascinating and enlightening. And now here I am. I'm getting an invitation to participate in it. So I thought, okay, this sounds really neat, interesting. I know you were asking for an idol that I should speak with, and that's where I struggled with it. I'm like, I really don't have idols. I don't know. Idols, I guess, means different things to different people.
Right.
I have mentors without them knowing that they're mentoring me.
Right.
People that I look at in a specific situation, in a specific circumstance, and how they reacted to that specific situation, and how they were able to overcome adversity, how they were able to work with others. So I was fascinated, and I was also flattered, and I'm glad we are able to do it.
Awesome. Well, it's really our pleasure once again to have you back in BoXia Media. I mean, you have already heard about the platform, and now that you're actually with us with BoXia and BoXia Media. So yeah, I think different people call their mentors, their role models differently, right? I mean, you can call it an idol, you can call it a source of inspiration, you can call it someone who actually influenced or impacted my life, right, throughout different times in life as well, right? It's maybe not the same person when you're younger than when you're a little bit more experienced in your career, etc. as well.
And to be honest with you, there are so many other mentors for me who no one has ever heard of, but they were my colleague or a boss that I worked with at a company in the private sector when I was in the private sector, who really changed my life with a comment they made or a behavior they did, and it influenced me and it taught me a lot. So there are a lot of people that have helped guide me along the way. So it's, that's the other thing that was interesting about your invitation, is that it forced me or compelled me to think long and hard about so many individuals who've made a big difference and have shaped really my outlook on life.
Right. Yeah, sometimes we are so caught up and so busy that we actually don't even maybe give it a second to think about it, right? So it kind of, I guess, forces you a little bit to give it a thought, at least.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now it's time to talk about them.
Okay.
As I said, it can be one person, multiple. You tell us.
I mean, it's up to you. Certainly, the relevant ones to the current situation are civil rights champions. Obviously, today we're also, I talked about the pandemic, but another historical moment that we're going through in society, and the aftermath and the ongoing protests in the US and Canada, and the current discussion, real and important discussion about systemic racism. It really, we could talk about the relevant champions of civil rights, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, or even Barack Obama. For me, have been monumental in really shaping my outlook and teaching me how to deal with difficult, sometimes what may seem insurmountable situation, and how they dealt with it. And all of these individuals and others, by the way, have faced in tremendous odds against them, have faced critics, not just on the opposite side of their point of view, but from within their own community, from within their own allies and their own like-minded folks. And to me, that is really one of the most interesting things. I know a lot of people focus on let's say Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or even Barack Obama and others. A lot of focus on on the moments of triumph, on the moments of big moments. What inspires me are the moments of adversity when their own supporters challenge them, when their own supporters are frustrated with them. It also shows me their humanity, because for most of the time we see these individuals and others, again, I don't want to limit it to just these individuals, as godlike figures who have never made mistakes, who have always done the right thing. But then when you really read their biography or learn more about them, you see their flaws, you see their mistakes, you see their humanity. And for me, I get reassurance out of that, because I know I'm full of flaws, and I sometimes have the imposter syndrome. They think, oh, am I really able to do this? And am I really qualified to say this or do that? And then I'm reminded of even giants who themselves have made mistakes or had setbacks, but they themselves admitted it and confronted it and dealt with it. So I get a lot of inspiration out of these moments of setbacks, when I know those people who at one point maybe I thought could never do anything wrong, but they themselves had moments of humanity, and then how they dealt with it. So I get a lot of comfort in that, and also inspiration, because they teach me how to deal with those moments.
Awesome. Yes, I completely agree. One thing though I noticed is that you're mentioning Black American leaders. So I'm just wondering, Omar, do you have any other figures, perhaps maybe Canadian influences?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, I picked these figures because they influenced, I think, history. I know, of course, mostly in the U.S., and perhaps because of the dominance of U.S. culture in North America and around the world, that these figures. But yeah, I mean, for sure, we've just Viola Desmond. We've just put her on the $10 bill, and her story in fighting racism and discrimination in Canada was actually a story that probably many Canadians never heard of before. And the idea of putting her on our currency had stirred the conversation about her history and about her courage. So she's certainly an important figure in Canada's history. There are, so there are many other. I mean, I talk about Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Pierre Elliott Trudeau is not a person of color, but he believes in so strongly in the important value of civil rights and civil liberty that he worked so hard with his government on implementing or adopting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I would say the Charter of Rights and Freedom was probably the most important, or one of the most important moments in Canada's history that has shaped it moving forward. It was adopted in the 82, and ever since its adoption, I think our Canada's our histories, or our country's trajectory has changed forever. And how he negotiated and fought and worked so hard to adopt it, with provinces, with the public, with so many people, naysayers and protesters, and obviously supporters too. But it was, if anybody studies how our Constitution is structured, we know that adopting or repatriating or amending the Constitution is incredibly a difficult process, and he was able to get it through. Not without setbacks. I mean, to this day, we still don't have Quebec as a signatory of the Constitution, but even that, Quebecers take pride in the Charter. Pierre Elliott Trudeau has set a great example for me in how to fight very hard in making a difference, and maybe not knowing what kind of dramatic difference it's going to make on Canada for forever. But he believed in it, and he was successful at it.
Definitely a very remarkable achievement.
For sure, and it really shaped. It shaped also my political views, my social views. I believe in equal rights, and I think the best way to protect equal rights is by protecting individual freedoms and individual civil rights. That's the basic element of ensuring that people have equal rights, is making sure everybody has their freedom, and having a law that enshrines freedoms is one thing, but having a constitution that enshrines individual liberties is another. And it has really shaped our courts. It has shaped our laws. It has shaped our society. And look at what it's done to LGBTQ rights. Look at what is done to Indigenous rights. And we still, by the way, have a long way to go on all of these rights, but we've been able to make dramatic leaps because of that document.
Correct, for sure. So for the audience who just tuned in, we're actually with MP Omar Alghabra. So he's speaking about his sources of inspiration, such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Pierre Trudeau, and many more. So are you ready to continue, Omar?
I am ready.
Awesome. So and now it's a question regarding Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So what do you think that they would have done, or they would have reacted if they actually witnessed events that have recently unfolded in the US, and in particular with the death of George Floyd?
Yeah, I mean, these two individuals, I think it probably, they lived through more dramatic, but in the same, they were the champions of civil rights for African Americans in the United States, and they've lived through a lot more tumultuous and difficult scenarios at the time, and both came at it in a different way. Malcolm X was more hard-nosed about it. He was more aggressive and forceful, while Martin Luther King was more diplomatic and tried to be more conciliatory. But they both, and I think it's that dynamic that really helped at the time to again change America in the 60s. But they both went at it in a different way, and they both had their flaws, and they both had their setbacks, and they both had their critics. In fact, Malcolm X was one of the biggest critics of Martin Luther King. But I know that they both would be really speaking up against the murder of George Floyd. And against systemic racism. They both would be inspiring millions of people to push for change. They both would be challenging the rest of us in society to do better, to acknowledge the flaws that we have, and to do more. And they both would be leading, I think, in today's movement if they were with us.
Definitely. Completely agree with you. Now, on another note, I guess, knowing that you have Syrian origins, are there any Arab leaders you also admire and you would like to share with us?
Oh, I haven't even thought about that. I'll be honest with you. I learned more about Arab history and Arab culture in Canada than I did when I was growing up in the Middle East. And people might be surprised to hear me say this, but the truth and the reality of the situation in the Middle East is that because of the nature of governments over there, much of the history we learned is selective. It is skewed, it's biased, it's unfortunately not always truthful. And it took for me to get out of the Arab world and have access to a variety of writers and intellectuals and historians who really have written in honesty and on a fact basis a history of the Arab world that I would have never heard of if I had remained in the Arab world. So there are many intellectuals and Arab leaders from a political standpoint. I know there are others and many. I'm not honestly off the top of my head, because the ones that are commonly named have also mostly been accused of also committing some human rights violations and human rights abuses. So, while some of them have inspired millions when they talked about Arab identity and patriotism, but they also have been accused of running, police services that have arrested their dissidents and oppositions, and so this is something that I'm not really interested in celebrating, and I regret. So I'm hesitant to name Arab political leaders at this moment, because I need maybe to do some more homework before I name anybody.
That's no problem at all. I mean, it's a very different reality in different parts of the world, so it's completely understandable. So moving on, Omar, on a more positive note, you'll need to put on your MP hat momentarily. So I promise you that it's not going to be as intense as in the House of Commons. So I'm not really sure how it really feels like to be there live. I definitely cannot relate to the intensity of those debates. But do you guys feel nervous, get sweaty, during those debates? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, of course. It depends, right? It depends on the topic. It depends on the intensity, like you said, or the heat of the moment. But I always get butterflies anytime I stand in the House of Commons. It is, and I hope I never lose that butterfly, because I am conscious and aware that when I stand up and speak in the House of Commons, I'm not speaking as Omar. I'm not speaking as an individual. I'm speaking as a person who holds a high office and represents over 120,000 people. In fact, millions of Canadians, even the ones who don't necessarily live in my riding. So I'm conscious of the responsibility that I carry, and also the moment that I'm living in. So I'm cautious about every word I say, every position I take, every position I defend, because it's really important, and it's meaningful, and it's going to mean a lot to a lot of people, understandably so. So yes, there's an awesome sense of responsibility and awareness that I carry with me, and as I said, I hope I never lose that. But it's it's what really drives me, but it's also what keeps me cautious. It's what compels me to do my homework. I'm often asked by some people, why aren't there's something happening either here or around the world? Why am I not commenting on this, and why am I not commenting on that? Am I being, is my voice being suppressed? Am I playing two political games to toe the party line? And the truth of the matter is, I tell them, look, again, I'm an MP, and I need to, if I'm going to utter any word, I need to be knowledgeable about the topic that I'm speaking about, and I can't just react to every news headlines and every story without me fully studying the issue and knowing the various angles of the issues and what is being done and who's doing what. So I understand the temptation to always want to offer a comment on everything, but I also, again, remind myself it's not about what my opinion is of an issue. I need to be knowledgeable about it before I speak, because I represent an office that is bigger than who I am, and I need to be thoughtful about everything I say on behalf of that office.
Right. Well, intervening when it's relevant is definitely very important. That's for sure.
Intervening when it's relevant, and also saying something meaningful, not just reactionary words.
Right. So I hope this issue or crisis, you're a little bit knowledgeable about this. So I want to bring you back to 2015 and 16, when Syria was still facing the ongoing crisis. Canada and the world agreed to welcome Syrian refugees, but some people in the Western world were not necessarily happy, including some Canadians. So at that moment, is there a measure in the Constitution you would have referred to specifically to persuade Canadians that it's important to welcome these refugees?
So, the situation in Syria started in 2011, and in fact, the issue of Syrian refugees had become a political issue during the 2015 campaign, because there were a lot of critics who were criticizing at that time the Harper government of not doing enough to play a role in helping the millions of Syrian refugees, where other countries around the world, especially like-minded countries, have been stepping up and doing their role. So, and at that time, Justin Trudeau made a commitment to welcome 25,000 Syrian refugees. And by the way, at that time, the Harper government had only, I think, allowed in about 1,000 or 1,200 Syrian refugees over the last 2 years since their civil war or their conflict started. So, and it was, I think, a moment where I think Justin Trudeau inspired Canada and Canadians to be who we are. I always say in politics, there are two types of motivations that you can inspire people to do. One is driven by fear, and another is driven by hope. And the one to inspire fear is easier to access, because as humans we tend to be, of course, by instinct, skeptical, worried about consequences if we're not sure if what we're doing is going to work out. But then the other one, hope, I think, is much more powerful but much more difficult to inspire, because you need to have people imagine and dream about a really much more positive outcome, and to speak directly to our inner human instincts that are compassionate, that are positive, that have love for each other. So I think that was the competition between fear. Are we letting in too many people into this country? Do we know if they're going to integrate well? That's the fear. Are they going to take away jobs? And then the other one, the hope, is, almost all of modern Canada, other than Indigenous people, have come from another parts of the world, either because they escaped a difficult situation or because they were pursuing a brighter future. So we know that Canada's story is built on newcomers who built this country, and we know that just like our predecessors had proven the idea of welcoming people from around the world to be positive for the country, we know that we need to do the same for other people who are escaping persecution or conflict. So it was these competitive ideas, and I'm glad to say that the experiment ended up being extremely positive. In fact, Canadians ended up privately sponsoring more Syrians than the government brought in.
Yeah.
And today, 4 years later, there are obviously some stories of some who are having a hard time integrating, but the overwhelming majority of Syrian newcomers have integrated well, have started businesses or found jobs, and their kids are doing so well in school and volunteering in our community organizations. And I know that moment in our history is going to be looked back on with fondness and gratitude. So it's again another moment in our history that I think I know for sure has saved the lives of thousands and has meant a lot to those families, but also I think has made a positive difference to our society, to our country in the long run.
Definitely. As you mentioned, nothing's perfect, but we're continuing to do a great job, which is what matters at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to know that we are making, we are not perfect. In fact, that's what needs us to keep driving to higher grounds, to get closer to perfection as we can. And the voices of criticism, the voices of conscience are extremely important in helping us see some of our flaws and pushing us to do more.
Definitely. Wow, Omar, I'm really sad to see that time flew by. Actually, we don't have much time left, but do you have any last words you would like to share with our audience?
First of all, I want to thank everybody for how Canadians conducted themselves and continue to conduct themselves during this pandemic. It's not been easy, and it will not be easy for a while. We've dramatically changed how we live our lives, and we've seen dramatic changes to our economy. But yet, as I said earlier, you see this camaraderie, you see compassion, you see thoughtfulness come out of Canadians. And I'm not just talking, obviously the government is playing its role and has done a good job responding to COVID. But I think it's much more impressive when you look at what individuals and community organizations on the ground have been doing over the last few months. And it's heartwarming, it's inspiring, and it's reassuring because, as I said, it's not over yet. But having seen what I saw over the last few months, I'm reassured that we will continue to find a way to together to work our way out of this pandemic. We are our brothers and sisters keepers, and I want to thank everybody who has played their role, either by following public health advice, because that alone is important, not just for themselves and their families, but for the broader society, and also for doing other things, for donating to local charity, for volunteering at a local food bank, for helping an elder or a senior in our families or in our neighbors. Like I see, there's so many stories, and I'm really grateful for it. So I just want to thank everybody, and I want to say that none of us, they're not alone. And at a moment of difficulty, sometimes it may feel like we're helpless, but they're not alone. And I encourage them to reach out if they want to speak to to reach out to me if they want to speak to their political representative or other political representative, or to reach out for any other help to their friends, neighbors, because we're here for each other. And I just want to thank everybody for what they have done and what they continue to do.
Definitely. Let's stay united, as Omar was saying. So thank you so much for your time, Omar. It was really a pleasure having you here with us. But I really hope it's not the last time we have you here, as I'm pretty sure you have more role models to share with us or you want to speak about.
Thank you very much, Irene. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's say bye to our audience right now. So for everybody watching us, hope to see you soon. Take care of yourselves. So don't forget to follow us on social media. The talk show broadcasts every Saturday at 11 a.m. Donc, à bientôt. Prenez soin de vous. Hasta pronto. 再见.